There are many ways that we can abandon ourselves, and the impact can be incredibly significant, especially for people who experience childhood trauma. And today I want to talk about the impact that that has on your journey. Welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. So, self-abandonment is something that I think most people do to some degree, but for survivors of childhood trauma, because it impacts our sense of self so significantly, we are abandoning ourselves continuously in a variety of ways. And the impact that that has on us as we're going through difficult things, so even as we're going through childhood, and also in our adult lives, even once we're out of the difficult, traumatic situation, we continue to self-abandon and it continues to have an impact. So in particular, there really are a lot of ways that we can kind of self-abandon, but where it often tends to come up with this community is not honoring, and I use that word very deliberately, and it's something that I've said for years and years and years, but honoring what we want and what we need. When we don't do that, that is self-abandoning. If we are not honoring what we need in regards to boundaries, that is self-abandonment. And this is related to boundaries, but if we constantly put other people's needs or desires ahead of ours under pretty much all circumstances, pretty much any person, that is self-abandonment. And even things that, like not allowing yourself to dream about something that you want in your life or that you want to create, that is also a form of self-abandonment. So if you think about being a child and you start minimizing or denying your experience as a way of coping, that is a form of self-abandonment, because you're not acknowledging, and for good reason, but you're not acknowledging, you're not able to really honor the reality and truth of what you're experiencing. And so that self-abandonment starts very early. If you have a caretaker who isn't really present for you, so aside from any sort of sexual trauma, but if you have a caretaker that's not really available to you, that is a form of abandonment. And to cope with that, you tell yourself that it's not that big of a deal, they can't help it or whatever. And so you are abandoning, through that, you're abandoning what you desire, what you need, what you feel, by rationalizing it because somebody else is experiencing something potentially worse in your mind, or kind of reasoning why it isn't present. And then as we go through our life, even throughout our childhood, we might want to do something, but we're not sure how somebody else will feel about it. So we abandon the idea. There are so many different ways that we do this. And in my work, taking care of your needs, self-care types of things, and boundaries are some of the biggest ones, and probably really most impactful. So like when I talk about giving yourself some space to consider, what do I want? What do I really have this desire for? Maybe it's something specific, like a tangible thing, or maybe it's even a feeling that you want. And then you kind of talk yourself out of it. It's not the right time. Somebody else needs something first. I need to get my to-do list done. Those are all forms of self-abandonment. And of course, there is a spectrum of what self-abandonment can look like. And sometimes it's relatively minor and it can be incredibly significant. And where I tend to see that is people that are in very unhealthy relationships and they continue to put that person ahead of themselves. Um, and also, I see it quite often in not taking care of your physical needs. So, certainly, emotional needs is part of this, but physical needs, like medical issues, is where this can show up a lot. I'm absolutely guilty of it. I ended up in the hospital for a few days before I could have surgery because I had to be on IV fluids in order to get my pancreas to calm down. Um, because I ignored it, because I didn't think it was that big of a deal. It was incredibly painful off and on for quite a long time. Um, and I thought it was just maybe normal. It was just something I had to deal with. And I ended up in the emergency room. But we do this, right? It could be something relatively minor, or it could be something quite significant. But ignoring that, kind of playing it off like it's not a big deal, or somebody else needs something more than we need to take the time or the resources to deal with this thing going on with us. It shows up in so many different ways. And through that self-abandonment, every time, so starting as a child and through this current moment, every time there's a part of you that recognizes something that you need, you're hungry and you ignore it because you need to get this other stuff done first, or you are eating badly and you just need to stop and therefore you have to starve yourself. All of that stuff is abandoning what you need. And when you abandon something that you desire, that you need, and so again, this can show up in a lot of ways. Boundaries is something that you need, might also be something that you desire, but it's something that you need. Taking care of yourself is something that you need. It's not just a desire. Now, a 90-minute massage might be a desire when seeing a physical therapist might be something that you actually need. But, or maybe both of those things would be helpful. But each time that there's something that comes up for you, and whether it's something that you ignore, you tell yourself that you shouldn't want or need it, you tell yourself it can wait. Imagine that you are saying that or responding in that way to a child. Now, depending on where you are on this journey, you might even consider imagining telling yourself or saying that to yourself as a child, whether you're 2 years old or 5 years old or 10 years old or 15 years old. Imagine that a young child is coming to you and saying that they're hungry and it's time for them to eat. And you tell them, not now, we have to get these other things done first. And you keep coming up with other things that need to get done before you feed them, because that's probably what you're doing for yourself too, right? So if you keep doing that, what is that doing to that child? What are you saying to that child? And how is that child going to interpret that? What are they going to take that to mean about who they are? How are you making that child feel in that moment? And if you're not in a place where you can imagine yourself and feel empathy about that, imagine another child. Imagine a teenager who is so desperate for connection and to know that she or he matters in their family. And they come to you with a struggle that they're having. And you tell them it's not a big deal, that it shouldn't bother them and they just need to get over it. Is that something that you would say to a child, to a teenager? If you've got your own child or a niece or a nephew or any child that you see, if they're really struggling and they come to you, can you imagine saying that to them and just completely blowing it off? Probably not. Especially if it's somebody that means something to you, especially if it's somebody that you can see the struggle in their facial expression and the way that their body is present. When you are engaging in abandoning yourself, that is exactly what you are doing every single time. Every time you are saying something, you are saying those words to the child part of you that felt hurt, scared, alone, ashamed, abandoned. Every time you are reinforcing what that child learned to believe about who they are and what they deserve. And the child who carried that into their adult life because it continued to be reinforced by your own self-abandonment, by your own ways of minimizing and denying, and also likely from the people around you or the society saying that we need to, especially if you're a woman, that you need to be nice and you need to worry about other people's feelings and you need to be a caretaker. And if you're a male, that you're not supposed to feel anything, you're not supposed to want anything, or certainly need anything that's emotional. So it really can be reinforced in a lot of different ways. And we are so often bombarded by those ideas in our own mind and from things happening around us, television shows even, or books. It continues to reinforce that. So when there is something that you want or need, whether it's something seemingly frivolous or something that is actually really important for your well-being, for your healing, whether it's just ignoring it, whether it's saying that you don't deserve it, you are reinforcing those beliefs. So I'd actually like to encourage you to maybe take a moment, pause if needed, and just kind of consider. And again, if you can imagine yourself as a younger person, a time when you recognize that you were maybe struggling a little bit more with maybe feeling like you didn't belong or feeling alone in the world, feeling like people didn't get it or didn't get you. Think back to that time, and if that's difficult for you, just imagine a child. But thinking back to the age range in which you were feeling something like that, and the impact of hearing that you don't deserve it, or that what you want doesn't matter. This other thing or this other person matters more. Because we've had so many experiences that we take as evidence of those beliefs, it becomes so ingrained that it isn't even necessarily a thought. We may recognize that we have those thoughts, but they're so ingrained and their beliefs ultimately that they drive how we show up in the world, how we show up for ourselves, certainly. And so that it becomes this automatic pattern. Being mindful of being able to acknowledge what those needs and desires are is part of the practice of healing. Whatever those needs or desires are, something really simple or something more significant. Becoming aware, recognizing in the moment when there is something there, and then doing something to try to help meet that desire or that need. Now, obviously, sometimes that's going to be a lot easier than others, depending on what it is. But just by the acknowledgement from a place of acceptance, a place of compassion, that is healing. That is letting that child know that they matter. And it is kind of as simple as that. Now, obviously, there could be more specific things related to that in terms of what you're telling that child or what that child is able to experience. But ultimately, it really is about letting that child know, that teenager, that young adult, the person watching this video right now, you're letting that person know, you're letting that part of you know that they matter. And when we begin to believe that we matter to ourselves, and certainly by other people, but if we don't believe that we matter in here, we can never believe that we matter to anybody else. So when we can acknowledge, so I mentioned accept, that this is a want or a need, when we can look at that and say, okay, this is something that is real. It's something that is valid. It doesn't have to be life or death. It can be what you'd like for dessert. It could be where you want to go on your walk, who you want to spend time with. There are really so many different examples and for any given day of what that might be. But as you start to acknowledge that, as you meet it with acceptance and compassion, you are healing that wound, all of those wounds, but you're healing the wound that has led you to believe and likely kept you believing that you're not worthy, you're not good enough, you're not deserving. And again, believing that you don't matter. And every time, just as I said, every time that you ignore that want or need, you're reinforcing that what you want or need, how you feel, doesn't matter. When you can meet it with acceptance and compassion, you're undoing that. You're replacing those experiences with a point of connection that says, I matter. And that is such an important part of how we heal. Such an important part. And your needs matter. And how you define need can be different. And that's part of the reason why your desires also matter. And kind of an interesting thing that happens is that people will say, well, I don't really need that. And that could potentially be argued, but I will fully acknowledge that sometimes, how you define need can be different. And so, somebody could say, I don't need something. And it could be true that to survive the day, they may not need that thing. But to feel good, to feel connected, to be emotionally well, maybe it is actually needed. It could also be desired. But there are things that we need in our lives to be happy and healthy and to feel whole, and certainly to feel connected. And feeling connected is something that we do need as humans. And there are a lot of those things that we can survive technically without, but that doesn't mean that we don't need them. Thinking about your childhood, there were a lot of needs not met, a lot, and yet you survived. Does that mean it's okay? Absolutely not. Because there are things that we need in life that we don't absolutely have to have for survival, literal survival. But that doesn't make them really any less needed. Sure, we can survive without feeling connected to somebody. We can't survive without oxygen. But how well do we really live when we have no connection? How well are we really living when we are continually engaged with somebody who is hurtful, who does things that reinforce the idea that you don't matter? So I would encourage you to really kind of think about that. For me, when I think about needs and desires, desires are more about extra kinds of things. And that could mean a lot of things. But when we need things to feel happy, healthy, whole, and free, or when there are things in our life or in our experiences that help us feel those things, those become, or at least many of them become, needs, not just desires. And when it comes to emotional well-being, when it comes to physical health, especially when you think about longevity, because in the short term, like if you've got something that you're concerned about medically and you think, well, I don't have the time to go to the doctor, or there's other things that take priority, or I don't have the resources to go to the doctor, or I don't want to feel embarrassed because maybe it's nothing. It's possible that you might get through that. You might learn to live with that, whatever it is. It may not be something that's really significant in terms of your health in that moment. But if it becomes a chronic situation, that's going to affect your life, right? Your daily living experience, whether it's pain, whether it is, I don't know, like a new allergy or something that ultimately does impact your life, but it's not so significant that you're forced to go to the doctor. But instead, you just tell yourself it's not that big of a deal. But it's affecting your quality of life. And you deserve to have what you need so that you can live the best life available to you. And when I say available to you, I'm not talking about what you deserve or what you can specifically create on your own. I'm talking about being deserving of it because you are a human, because you have survived things that nobody should ever have to experience. So you deserve to have a life that feels good, that feels free. And whether it's emotional stuff or physical or medical stuff, if we're ignoring the needs that we have, we don't fully feel free because we're ignoring those things. We're reinforcing by the ignoring that we don't matter. So I would encourage you to really think about that. to think about the ways that you self-abandon, whether it's emotional or physical, desires or needs. Maybe even consider writing down, maybe making a list of desires and needs, and writing down what some of those are for you, and notice where you put them. Because if we look at it as a desire or a want, we're much more likely to dismiss it. And again, sometimes those desires are actually needs for a healthy, happy, whole, and free life. So take some time maybe and really think about that and consider what that might mean to a part of yourself that felt abandoned, that felt alone in the world. And know that this potentially could bring up some stuff for you. So be mindful of that. And if it feels like it's bringing up too much, then definitely move away from it. Use a healthy form of distraction. But I think it can be an interesting exercise to do. And maybe even, now this can definitely bring up some stuff, but maybe even consider writing a letter to a time, to yourself at an age in which you recognize that you really ignored, dismissed some needs that might have been there, and acknowledge that. And if you're working with a therapist, maybe even consider sharing that. Actually, I think it would be really great to share the idea and maybe even a letter with your therapist to really process it, because this can be, aside from just the writing of the letter, what comes up through this, what we've talked about here today, can actually be quite significant for your healing. So something to consider if you feel drawn to it. And I'd love to hear from you. What did you notice coming up? I recognize that earlier I mentioned maybe pause here and think about something, and I don't remember if I told you what to think about. But it had something to do with that. I do know that. So pardon me if I did forget to mention what that was. But a lot to consider. And the you that is sitting here watching this video right now, listening to the sound of my voice if you're doing other things, the you that is here right now with me, the you from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, however old you might be, the you that exists in all of those phases is deserving of having your wants, your desires, and your needs met. And it is an important part of healing. Let me know what you think. Share in the comments. Thanks so much for being here. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.